Okay. Hello, good morning, everybody. On behalf of IAGES, we are welcoming you to this first IAGES webinar. We have the distinguished panelists from all over country. As you can see, whoever I speak name will raise their hand. To start from left to right, I have Dr. Ajay Agarwal from Mathura. Ajay, can you raise your hand? Yeah. Dr. Chittaranjan Das from Bhubaneswar, Odisha. Dr. Venkatesh from Coimbatore. Venkatesh, can you raise your hand, Venkatesh? Dr. Yeah, Dr. M.G. Bhatt.
He is my mute.
Okay. Yeah. Please don't speak in between, otherwise your video will start. Dr. M.G. Bhatt from Bangalore. Yes, M.G. And Dr. Ashwin Thangavelu. Dr. Ashwin Thangavelu from Coimbatore. Yeah. So today we are going to talk about the most common surgeries we are doing, appendicectomy and cholecystectomy. How to do that in the era of COVID pandemic. I'm pleased to welcome all of you. So these are the panelists we have today. First of all, we thank the IAGES Executive Committee for approving this novel idea of IAGES webinar. We thank all the panelists who have in a short notice come forward to participate in this webinar. And we thank the Lab Guru for taking up this initiative and transmitting this across the world. So why should we discuss what is at risk? The surgical teams at high risk for SARS-CoV-2 exposure. Why? Because viral particles found in nasal swabs, pharyngeal swabs, sputum, bronchial swabs, gastrointestinal tissue, blood and stool. Only urine and CSF are so-called immune. Isolation room surfaces, clinician shoe covers have tested positive. Virus can spread via aerosols and fomites. Surgical smoke from the use of electrocautery also contain virus. So I'll first go to Dr. M.G. Bhatt, who is the senior consultant and past president and trustee of IAGES. M.G., what are your thoughts on the risk of viral infection? M.G.? M.G., are you with us? Okay, so I'll go to Ashwin Thangavelu.
Yes, sir. So as we are all aware, COVID possesses a unique threat in that it has a very high rate of infecting people. Even though this is similar to a lot of the common flus and influenzas which we were getting earlier also, the problem with the COVID,
I cannot hear.
Easily it can spread to other people. And the virulence is very high. And it holds the same for the medical fraternity as well. And the other major challenge is even up to 2 weeks, the patients might not have any symptoms. So even a COVID positive patient might not show any symptoms, which makes it exceedingly challenging for us to identify which subset of patients could be infected. So that is why this webinar, I think, is of very good importance.
Thanks, Ashwin. I'll go to next slide now. I request all the panelists to keep their mic muted unless when you are talking. The next slide.
Diagnostic and 75
Operating on COVID-19 patient is a challenge because what we need is a operation room, operation theater with negative pressure capabilities which are recommended.
Okay.
However,
I cannot hear properly.
Sorry?
Yeah. There is the Bolshu. The connection, right?
Okay. Most of our operation theaters are positive pressure operation rooms. What is a negative pressure operation room, which is not available at majority of the places. However, if it is not available, then we need to allow more time between the surgical cases, clean and disinfect the operation room after each case. Now, hospital charts, pagers, cell phones must be left outside the OR. Anything in contact with the patient should be considered contaminated. Dedicated runner nurse should be posted outside the OR, so in and out movements by the circulating nurse can be avoided. Disposable equipments, keep only those what is currently needed and absolutely required for this case. I would go to Dr. Arupaba on your thoughts regarding this.
Yeah, as Ashwin has told, this is a new threat. There are a lot of things we don't know about it. An important thing is OT, which is being used for emergency surgery, has to be designated. Only one OT has to be used, and that has to be designated as a COVID OT. No other cases should be done there. And yes, you have already covered most of the things.
Surgery and what
issues are definitely there. There are a lot of things we don't know as of now. One thing I want to add about the disposable instruments is it is very important that single-use instruments, you have to decide whether it is required or not. Because if you have put it inside the OT, and even if you are not using it, you will have to dispose it off. It cannot be reused.
Exactly. Good. So we'll move on to the next slide. The protective equipments. Surgery to be considered aerosol generating procedure, which is shortly known as AGP, particularly with the use of electrocautery and laparoscopy. PPE, the personal protective equipments, including face shield, mask, waterproof gown, double gloves, shoe covers, etc. are must. N95 is better than standard surgical mask in filtering the aerosols. However, there is no evidence to suggest that it has reduced the surgical transmission of cases till now, but better to be safer than sorry. Dr. M.G. Bhatt, I come to you, your thoughts on this regarding the use and availability of PPE.
Thank you very much, Sunil. This is an excellent initiative by the IAGS, and you're doing a wonderful presentation. I must say first that we are all completely new to this aspect. As I was discussing with some people, it's completely different to what we have seen in patients having HIV and our dealing with them. This is a airborne or aerosol spread, which makes it completely different to what we are exposed to. The protective gear has to be completely different when you're dealing with these patients. And especially when we come to minimal invasive laparoscopy and endoscopy, the care becomes extra important. And I think you're going to describe on these things. We are totally new and waiting to understand how to deal with these.
Thank you, MG. I move on to the next slide. The surgical techniques and risk of exposure. So during laparoscopy, CO2 insufflation and desufflation, energy devices, high-speed surgical equipments generate a lot of aerosols. Release of pneumoperitoneum can spread these aerosols widely. Use of smoke evacuation system filtration device is must for laparoscopy during viral pandemic. Risk of aerosol spread is less in open surgery as compared to laparoscopy. I move on to the next slide and then we'll discuss this. Okay, so regarding the use of laparoscopy, we are using CO2 for the pneumoperitoneum. there are a lot of viral particles, aerosols generated within the peritoneal cavity, and sudden gush of air, sudden leak of pneumoperitoneum can cause the release of viral load positive aerosols within the OR, and that is dangerous. So if you don't have the smoke evacuation system filtration device, which most of us don't have access to, we should not be doing laparoscopy during this viral pandemic. I now invite Dr. Venkatesh from Coimbatore, past president and trustee. Venkatesh, your thoughts on this? Dr. Venkatesh? Is the audio problem? I go to Dr. Chittaranjan Das.
Yes.
Dr. Das?
Yes. So the first thing you have told us that laparoscopic surgery is much more dangerous than open surgery, number one. And number two, elective surgeries we should avoid. This was the trend suggested by SAGES and also IAGS. For the reason that in case of laparoscopic surgery, yes, there is lot of chances of pneumoperitoneum coming up, and we don't have that smoke inhibitor and other absorber, so that it is difficult to control the pneumoperitoneum. And second thing is, as we use electrocautery, you should use it in a very low stand, because it creates a lot of gas, and those gas smokes should be absorbed by ultrafiltration, which we don't have. And as it is a blood-borne virus, in pneumoperitoneum normal cases also, where there is asymptomatic COVID also, there is chance of contamination. And we have to be very cautious about that. And my opinion is that once you don't have these privileges, these smoke absorber or ultrafiltration devices, and we should not venture blindly for laparoscopic surgery.
Absolutely. So we move on to the next slide. IAGS president circulated this guideline in the third week of March, quite early before the other organizations came forward, simply to avoid doing elective surgeries. The reasons are to prevent the spread of viral infection from the asymptomatic carriers or COVID patient to the medical staff, surgeons, anesthetists, and other patients also. Because there has been study from China to suggest that 41% of the patient who they received were from the internal transmission from the hospitals. Second thing is conservation of the resources, medical resources, PPE, gloves, etc. Conserved today will definitely help to manage the emergencies and treatment of COVID-19 patients. SAGES came out with beautiful guidelines just before 2-3 days, and they said that we should ration our services. And first thing was that all elective surgical and endoscopic cases should be postponed at this time. All non-essential hospital or office staff should be allowed to stay at home and telework. So Dr. Ajay Agarwal from Mathura, what are your thoughts on this?
Sir, since we all know we are facing a very virulent organism right now. So even if we find a patient we need to operate, which is not positive or which do not show any symptoms, but it has been found that later on these patients have developed symptoms and have found to be positive. So whether we do elective surgery or emergency surgery, we have to take into account that these patients are potentially positive. So we need to use PPEs for us and our teams. And we all know we are in acute shortage of these PPEs. Our association has already taken steps to provide these to the needy hospitals. But despite that, we are in severe shortages of PPEs. So we need to conserve these PPEs for actual patients which might require these later on, and healthcare staff. So it's very necessary to conserve our resources and to prevent our healthcare personnel from getting this infection. So
we need to stop all the elective surgical and endoscopic work, and yes, no non-essential hospital staff should be allowed to come and work at the hospital. The next slide is the SAGES recommends that minimum necessary staff should attend the patient. Adherence to the hand washing, antiseptic foaming, and appropriate use of PPE is must. All non-urgent in-person clinic or office visit should be cancelled or postponed unless needed to triage active symptoms or manage wound care. And multidisciplinary team meeting should be held virtually as far as possible and limited to core team only. Dr. Venkatesh, I come to you now, that this is very important not to see the patients in outpatient clinics. I would like to have your thought on this.
Actually, it is true that we should not see the patients, but you have patients apart from fever and any kind of abdominal pain, ureteric problem coming to you. I don't know whether to refuse or not. We are seeing some patients. We are doing some ultrasound scans on these patients, but very limited. And we are protecting ourselves when we do it. See, I think only thing we can probably do it now. If you have a hospital, maybe it's very difficult to close down. We have some, we don't see fever patients. We tell them to go to government hospitals. And 3 or 4 patients so far we have sent to the government hospital. We have found that to be negative for COVID-19. And so we think that, we just see only emergencies. That's what I think.
Yeah. So I come to Dr. M.G. Bhatt now. Yeah. MG, what are your thoughts on how can we tell the patient not to come to us, not to come to OPD? How can we refuse? Your audio is not on.
Now, we need to use some innovations in these things. The innovative measures are, one is, of course, we need to accept that we are dealing only with emergencies. Elective patients are avoided, but you do have patients who get concerned and who want to see. And I think the best way of doing it is doing a video consultation with them, which can be set up directly. These days you have FaceTime, you have video calls which can be done, and you can discuss with the patients. And if any advice to be given, you can give. If you need to see them as an emergency, then arrangements to be made. I think this way you can at least convince the patients what are the needs and what can be done. And if necessary only, then you see them in the outpatient department. I think the most important thing is all of us has to get used to video consultation and video advice for these patients. This is what I feel.
Thank you. The procedural consideration, as per SAGES, consideration to be given to the possibility of viral contamination to staff during surgery, any kind of surgery, whether it is open, laparoscopic or robotic. Previous research has shown that laparoscopy can lead to aerosolization of blood-borne viruses, that includes COVID also. For minimal access surgery procedures, use of ultrafiltration device for aerosol particles should be strongly considered. Strict use of protective gears is must for the entire team. So I think we have discussed this. I will move on to the next slide. The practical measures for surgery. So most important thing is consent discussion, and no better person to discuss regarding consent than Dr. M.G. Bhatt, who has a very thorough knowledge about the medical legal aspects of surgical practice. So M.G., I come to you again, that in this era of COVID pandemic, how should we be counseling the patient prior to surgery, and how should we be counseling our staff also?
See, one thing very important to realize here is that it is airborne and aerosol spread. So it's important for healthcare workers like us, the staff, to be first of all using masks when we start dealing with patients, both in outpatients and in inpatient patients. This is directly discussion with patients. Distancing and using masks become very important when we're dealing with patients. This is number one. Number two is when it comes to surgery and we want to take consent for the patient, we need to look into various aspects. One is actual surgery. Other one is endoscopies. One should realize endoscopy also is a source for spread to health workers, and one needs to be very careful doing these things. So in the consent, it's important for us that everybody understands it is aerosol spread, and we need to be consenting on these patients when we start doing any operations. They have to give consent for us that we are going to be, for example, if it is laparoscopy, in some of the cases where facilities are not there, we may even change over to open surgery for dealing with that, because it can spread across the room and everybody may be exposed. Anesthetists need to be very careful. The surgeons need to be very careful. The staff need to be very careful. Proper gear needs to be done, which is I think you're going to explain the proper protective gear, which covers the head, covers their entire body with no exposure of the skin in these cases. I think you talk about it. Other than that, there is nothing extra for the consent. I would think that is the most important thing. Everybody needs to understand that this can fastly spread to each other, and we need to be careful on that. And we only do surgeries when it's required. Otherwise, we may postpone.
MG, in last couple of weeks, we have seen many reports surfacing in media and in medical media, patients suing the hospital or the nursing home or the doctor for transfer of or transmission of viral infection. What are your thoughts on that?
I didn't get you. Can you just repeat, please?
In last 2 weeks, we saw many reports suggesting that patients suing the hospital or the nursing home or the individual doctor for the transmission of viral infection.
No, this is crazy. This is public not understanding the situation. See, without us, how are the patients going to be treated? And if we're going to treat patients, we are covering ourselves, we are protecting ourselves when treating patients. So I think it is wrong on the patient's part to consider this way. This is the same thing which is going on. Like you did hear in the media, some hospitals, some doctors being bashed up in Hyderabad over a COVID death. I think the public are still unaware of what's happening, unaware of healthcare workers. We are the most exposed in the society at the moment dealing with the patients. We are taking our precautions, and obviously we're going to spread the message that precautions are important. And it is just public knowledge which needs to be spread across, telling them that this is what they need to do. I think it's wrong for them to start suing, and in fact, telling people that they should not stay in some places. This is wrong. It is just public education what is required.
Okay. What I would say is while treating the patient for surgical illnesses in this COVID pandemic, we have to make to the patient and relatives absolutely clear that though we are taking utmost precautions for prevention of spread of the viral infection, nobody is sure who can be the asymptomatic carrier. Right now in our country, we don't have the luxury of doing corona test on each and everybody. And so many hospitals, including ours, have made special consent for the surgical procedures or any procedures in this COVID pandemic, which covers all these aspects. And these consents are available along with various surgeons and hospital administrators. And I think all the medical and surgical people, doctors who are treating the patients in COVID pandemic should take the special high-risk consent pertaining to the COVID viral transmission. We move on to the next slide. The practical measures for surgery. We already discussed that operating rooms for presumed suspected or confirmed COVID-19 positive patients should be appropriately filtered and ventilated. If possible, they should be negative pressure OR. Again, SAGES also suggests that only essential staff should be allowed inside the OR. Now, practical measures for surgery. We have discussed first 2 points. The third point is electrosurgery unit should be set to the lowest possible settings for the desired effect. I come to Dr. Arupbaba. Your thoughts on this, Dr. Arupbaba? regarding use of electrocautery.
Yeah, it has been found that the smoke created by using electrocautery, that has been found to contain viable virus. So those are definitely risk factors for aerosolization. So electrocautery has to be at the lowest setting, and preferably you should reduce the use of electrocautery, all energy devices, in fact. And I don't know whether monopolar diathermy pencils with attached smoke evacuators are available. I have not come across, but that would be a good option, yes. But as of now, we should be using the electrocautery minimum and at the lowest setting. Just one thing I want to add, that although it spreads through aerosols, as you have already told, this virus is present in a lot of body tissues, and it has been found positive in the entire gastrointestinal tract. So soiling from these fluids can also lead to infection. So not only aerosolization, if body fluids come in contact with the skin, and that can also lead to transmission. So it is PPE is absolutely a must.
Yeah. Now, regarding monopolar diathermy pencil with attached smoke evacuators, they were in vogue before 20 years. A lot of people were using it. Suddenly, nobody saw further interest in that, so they died out. What I believe is it's a very simple thing. In your suction, which you are using on the operation table, you can apply the sterile suction catheter, which are being used by the anesthetist colleagues. And then you can, with a small thread, simple thread, you can apply it to your monopolar diathermy pencil, and you can have suction along with the cautery. See, without cautery, it is very difficult to do majority of the surgeries. However, you can go away from your harmonic scalpels, from your ligature, from your thunderbeat. Majority of your energy devices, which are generating a lot of aerosols, we can go away with that. But we may have to use monopolar diathermy pencils. I go to Ashwin. Ashwin, you have been involved in teaching regarding the energy devices. What are your thoughts on this?
I totally agree with you. Only thing is, it is not only the simultaneous suction which we are doing, we also have to make sure that it goes through some form of a filtration system. At least we can try to make our own system by using the HEPA filters which are available for the ventilators, and make sure whatever gas we are letting out from the CO2 or the air which we are taking through a monopolar pencil gets circulated through that filter, so that the virulence load can be reduced as much as possible, in addition to the other precautions like PPEs and other stuff.
Ashwin, we are not talking about laparoscopy. This is regarding open surgery.
So for open surgery as well, sir, we can use a suction catheter similar to how we have suggested, connected to the suction apparatus, but only thing we have to make sure before it goes to the suction apparatus that we put it through a HEPA filter, which is available for the ventilatory patients. So technically that will reduce the virulence load which goes to the suction apparatus, because even the suction apparatus is an open system. It will not contain the virus and keep it. So that is the only flip side of doing it directly. So here, if we use some form of a filter, technically or theoretically, we can reduce the virulence load. But again, all this is too primitive and we don't have enough evidence or anything to support all this. It's merely a statement, which is more with theoretical.
Yeah. I move on to the next slide. They have suggested practical measures for laparoscopy. We are not advocating doing laparoscopy because we don't have the filtration systems which are mandatory. So I will skip this slide. Only point I want to make here is the incision for ports should be as small as possible to allow for the passage of ports and no leakage. The CO2 insufflation pressure should be kept to the minimum, and all demoperitoneum should be safely evacuated via filtration system before closure, before trocar removal, before specimen extraction or conversion to open. Again, these are the measures to prevent the spread of virus during laparoscopy, which I think we have discussed. Now, measures for use of filtration during laparoscopy. The important point is specimen should be removed once all the CO2 gas and smoke is evacuated. This is very important because normally in majority of the laparoscopic surgery, particularly the cholecystectomy and appendicectomies which we are discussing today, we don't remove the pneumoperitoneum completely before we remove the specimen. So this is a major difference from our routine practice. Second thing is suture closure devices that allow for leakage of insufflation should be avoided. The fascia should be closed after the desufflation. And hand assistant devices should be avoided because it does allow leakage of pneumoperitoneum. Now I come to the gallbladder disorders first. So we have a patient who have multiple gallstone dyspeptic symptoms. I go to Dr. Ajay Agarwal. What should be your advice? What will be your advice in this current era?
Most of the patients with gallbladder diseases are asymptomatic. However, we get patients who are in acute cholecystitis. But since we are facing this problem of COVID-19 situation, my take is if we can avoid it, we should try to treat the patient through medical measures like antibiotics and try to postpone as much as possible. If at all the patient does not improve by medical measures, or we have disease like perforated or gangrenous gallbladder, then we should venture into surgery. And that too, since we are avoiding laparoscopic surgery, I think we should go through the routine conservative cholecystectomies.
Okay. I go to Dr. Arupabha. You are getting a lot of gallbladder patients, particularly the complicated ones. You have a patient who is having severe acute cholecystitis with the signs and symptoms of sepsis. How will you proceed?
Initial approach will obviously be conservative. These patients have to be managed with very good antibiotics and proper NPO, Riles tube and all, with all monitoring facilities. But we have a small margin of error for these cases because this may go into septicemia. So before venturing for a cholecystectomy, maybe a good option would be a percutaneous cholecystostomy, which can be done ultrasound guided, or sometimes even in certain circumstances, one can even, if open cholecystectomy is not feasible due to various conditions of the patient, one can even go in for a open cholecystostomy if you don't have facilities for a percutaneous cholecystostomy.
Okay. I go to Dr. C.R. Das. I come to you later, Dr. M.G. Bhatt.
Yes.
Dr. C.R. Das, your views on acute cholecystitis patients?
Yes. So in what Arupabha told, once we get a case of acute cholecystitis, then our aim is not to go for surgery, but to try for conservative. And regarding pain factor, the main factor is during cholecystitis pain. If you can manage the pain, then I think he can be put for an elective surgery later on. But one thing is that if at all, if we are going for any type of intervention, we should have the facility in our OT, and we should have all the requirements, starting from ultrafilter and all smoke absorber, everything has to be there. And in my opinion, it is better to go for cholecystectomy, or at all later you can refer the case to a COVID hospital where they are doing it with all precautions and with all technicals.
Dr. M.G. Your audio is not on.
Sunil, thanks. Two things which I wanted to do. One is dealing with patients, see, first of all, as everybody has mentioned, we are only going to deal with emergency gallbladders and not elective gallbladders. Elective gallbladders can wait. Emergency gallbladder, there are two aspects. Are we dealing with patient who is COVID positive, or are we dealing with patient who is COVID negative? The chances of COVID positive patients are much less than having COVID negative patients. I think these are two distinct categories. If it is COVID, in any of these cases, we take all the precautions during the COVID situation. And if you're going to deal with a COVID positive patient or a COVID exposed patient, you take all precautions. And as you have mentioned, the various protocols, I don't think there is, I would be against doing laparoscopy for patients with all the facilities available and with all the precautions taken in COVID negative patients. In COVID positive patients, and if they require operation, then you have to be extra careful. And that is when all these systems of changing over to open or not doing laparoscopy comes in. But I think with all the facilities we have today in the corporate hospitals, we should not hesitate going for laparoscopy with complete precautions taken, is my view. I think if somebody wants to change that, please let me know, because I feel that with all the precautions, we can go ahead, complete care, and everybody knowing, and whatever you have mentioned of low pneumoperitoneum, suction, various things, what you mentioned. I'm open for discussion.
Yeah. So you have suggested a very good thing that laparoscopy, doing laparoscopy with all the precautions is no harm. But how can you prevent? No laparoscopic surgeon can be sure that there will be no air leak during the laparoscopic surgery.
I totally agree with you. There is no air leak. But, you know, having said that, if you do open surgery also, you have suctions coming in. You are depending on, you have opened a large wound. There is bound to be some amount of movement, which may be less with laparoscopy if you take all the care. Look into both aspects.
Yeah. So I come to you, Ashwin, regarding the percutaneous cholecystostomy. What are your thoughts on that?
So the first thing is to answer Dr. MG's question. I think laparoscopy is more dangerous because the pressure at which the fumes and the air comes out is much more compared to an open surgery, because it comes from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. So that is one big challenge which we have in lab. So that is why we are thinking more in terms of open rather than lab. The second thing, I think percutaneous cholecystostomy is a very important thing that we have to consider, because just merely acute cholecystitis is not a problem. A lot of the times patients can present early with just pain. They will have minimal wall thickness and minimal pericholecystic fluid. But if the patient doesn't have too many comorbids and they're stable, just antibiotics would be good enough. But in a small subset of patients where the gallbladder is overly distended with a very large stone, probably it is secondary to the obstruction at the neck level, which has caused the acute cholecystitis, then these are the patients perfectly fitting in for the percutaneous cholecystostomy, because the success rate of these patients undergoing a conservative management is quite high. And that is where just a simple ultrasound guidance would take care of all these issues. And once the patient is stable, we can wait for the situation to get better and for us to get equipped very well, and then plan for a definitive surgery at a later date. So I think percutaneous cholecystostomy is a very important aspect which we have to start considering once again in this epidemic era.
Okay, so I am pleased to share with you that we have now more than 500 people watching this IAGS webinar. We have started getting questions. So I have one question from a Dr. Srenik. For a patient with acute calculous cholecystitis who requires surgery, what precaution to be taken for lap chole? I think we have already discussed that. Another question is how long to wait before doing an elective cholecystectomy? So I come to you, Dr. Venkatesh. You are not doing elective cholecystectomy. How long do you wait? Your audio is off, Venki.
Yeah, it depends on the kind of infection, where the calculi is, and if there's obstructing the neck of the gallbladder. If the patient has got gangrenous kind of a gallbladder, I would probably go in and do a surgery rather than wait. If the patient can wait, if you treat with antibiotics and the patient is becoming all right with antibiotics, It depends. All depends on how the gallbladder presents.
Absolutely. So if it is only symptomatic gallstones, we can avoid it.
Only very symptomatic cholecystectomies I will do. Otherwise, I will wait.
Yeah. Dr. Ajay, you are from Mathura. You have plenty of cases of calculus cholecystitis. In last 15 days, how many cases you have to operate because of the severe cholecystitis?
We have not operated any patient with cholecystitis. We have got 2-3 patients which we have managed conservatively, and they have shown improvement. Now, most of these patients, they are asymptomatic, and most of the acute cholecystitis, they can be managed conservatively. So we haven't operated any patient with gallbladder in the last 50 days.
Okay. So I'm just going to give you a patient of 70 years old with hypertension, mild diabetes, controlled with oral anti-hypoglycemic agents. Patient is having severe calculus cholecystitis, Murphy's sign positive, upper abdominal pain, tenderness. Total count is 20,000, and he also has some jaundice. So how will you proceed, Dr. Arupabha?
So this person has a lot of comorbidities. He has evidence of sepsis. But again, my initial approach will be conservative. Maybe these sort of patients should be treated in a ICU or a HDU. And, but yes, again, there is a small margin. So there is a possibility you might have to go in for a percutaneous cholecystostomy.
Patient
facilities
also
are available.
Direct hyperbilirubinemia.
Yeah, but what does the ultrasound picture says? Does he have any CBD stones?
Severe calculus cholecystitis. No stones seen in ultrasound in lower end CBD.
Yeah, but this possibly is because of compression of the CBD by the inflamed gallbladder. We do get a lot of this sort of patients, and most of them do well conservatively in our experience. We rarely have had to go for percutaneous cholecystostomy or cholecystostomy in a very few number of cases.
Would you advise
since this person has comorbidities, so as I said, the margin of VA is little more compromised for that person. Even with jaundice, many patients do well with the conservative treatment. That's my experience.
Yeah. When would you advise MRCP?
Yes, MRCP would possibly be helpful, but I would just treat him conservatively for a few days. If his jaundice doesn't subside, then I will go in for an MRCP. If you have an MRCP, I'm speaking about my hospital because I don't have a hospital. I don't have an MRCP in hospital. But yes, if you have a facility in your hospital, I think you can go in for an MRCP. We have to send about 30 kilometers away from our hospital for an MRCP. So in the scenario, I would stabilize the patient and then send for an MRCP.
Okay. Ashwin?
So basically, the jaundice is the main thing which I'm concerned about. So if the liver function test seems okay, the alkaline phosphatase seems okay, the AST and ALT also seems okay, it's only a minimal increase in the bilirubin, I would still think cholecystitis is the reason, sepsis and cholecystitis. So that, again, like sir was saying, we would probably look at conservative management first. But the second important factor which I would like to know is also about the distension of the gallbladder. If it is an overly distended gallbladder, then definitely I will have a very low threshold and look at the coagulation profile. If it is normal, I will put in a percutaneous cholecystotomy in the beginning itself, because we know that the results of these patients once after decompression with antibiotic is much better rather than just giving only antibiotics without taking care of the bile which is, you know, infected and staying back in the system. So this is the only small change I would have in my management.
Okay. Is there any chance of leakage of bile from the gallbladder opening around the percutaneous tube?
So again, theoretically, definitely it will happen. There is no way to prevent this, but this is found to be insignificant and not really a problem in majority of the series. They have not really reported a generalized peritonitis after a endoscopic or ultrasound guided percutaneous cholecystostomy.
Okay. Dr. Bhatt, you wanted to say something? Dr. MG? Your audio is not on.
Dr. Sunil?
No. Sunil, I do agree, but you see the experience, the reported experience on publications is very limited when you look at all these things. We are theoretically talking, but the publications are limited on these exposures. When you do laparoscopy, there is going to, as long as you use less intra-abdominal pressure, I think the leakage will be less. There will be some leakage around, but at least it won't be a forceful leakage and everybody is protected. Surrounding people are all protected, is what I feel.
Yeah, Dr. Venkatesh, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Sunil, I don't agree with the, either you do a cholecystectomy or keep quiet. Don't aspirate. There can be some problems. I won't agree with Ashwin on this line. Either I will do a cholecystectomy or keep quiet and manage conservatively. I will never put a needle and aspirate. Definitely there will be a leak because of high pressure zone, and you can't do that.
Ajay?
There is not much of literature available on that. There is a cholecystostomy those days. They used to put a drain and then come out and all those things. It's all will cause issues. So either do a cholecystectomy or keep quiet.
Okay, point taken. Ajay Agrawal?
Sir, my take would be, even after ultrasound, we might miss the CBD stones. So initially for 48 hours, I will manage the patient for conservatively. If he doesn't show improvement or there is a rise in the bilirubin or the bilirubin level is high, I'll go for the MRCP. And if the stones are there, I'll go for ERCP and wait for the cholecystectomy. If there are no stones, then I'll go for percutaneous cholecystostomy and then wait for elective cholecystectomy.
Okay, so we are getting very important information from all these distinguished faculties. First of all, if you have a seriously ill cholecystitis patient who seems to be having empyema of the gallbladder with associated comorbidities, with obstructive jaundice, you obviously start treating him conservatively to start with. But if you have the facility available, you do an MRCP to find out whether there are stones obstructing the CBD bile flow. If you have MRCP which is showing there is an obstruction at the lower end of the CBD and there can be cholangitis, then obviously you go ahead with ERCP. Now ERCP is again an AGP, that means aerosol generating procedure. So one has to be very careful and take all the due precautions which we discussed while doing the surgery. Once you do ERCP and take out the stone, put in a stent if it is required, then I think the emergency is taken care of. But then there is second important emergency which Ashwin brought the attention, was that severely distended gallbladder. Now, if you have severely distended gallbladder and if you have good interventional radiologists available, you can go ahead and put in a percutaneous cholecystostomy tube, drain the gallbladder and come over the emergency. Later on, you can go in to do the elective cholecystectomy. However, there are places where the facilities for the elective percutaneous cholecystostomy is not available. And so in that case, we have to do an open cholecystectomy. I would not do laparoscopic cholecystectomy myself. And even majority of the places in India are not having smoke evacuation and ultrafiltration system in place. So I think we should be treating the patient with minimal of risk to the patient and to the doctor. Do you all agree?
Yes, Sunil, it's well taken.
Yeah. So we move on next. Yeah.
I just one point, Sunil. whatever is there, when the treatment aspect does not change. It is just the care what you have given, and you're only dealing with emergencies. I did hear people when to wait and all those things. All the treatment aspects, if it is conservative, it's conservative. You wait until the situation is better. So I think it is only the protection which becomes important, and emergency cases what we are dealing. Otherwise, the standard treatment continues.
Okay, point taken.
You said about drainage, yes, whether if it's required, percutaneous drainage, if it is required, all these things are standard treatments, nothing special here.
We got one question from Dr. Manish Gupta. He's asking that, do you recommend robotic procedure over laparoscopic in this era of pandemic? Anybody would like to volunteer?
Yes.
Ashwin?
Robotic is pretty much the same as laparoscopy. In fact, a lot of the times they keep a higher pressure rate in robotics because of certain limitations to move the table after a particular position. So definitely robotic would be as harmful as laparoscopy, if not more.
Yes, MG?
I would think it would be more, because it's unnecessary for a straightforward or a easy or a difficult gallbladder, which is normally done by laparoscopy. Adding the robotic, first of all, is a controversy, and you don't want any controversial things during these situations. Very clear.
So answer is no. Robotic is not safer than laparoscopy.
Not for laparoscopic cholecystectomy. Other things are different.
We move on to the next slide. Now we talk about the appendicitis. And I'll request Dr. C.R. Das.
Yes.
How will you deal with appendicitis in this pandemic COVID-19 era?
In this pandemic COVID-19 era, the surgeon's attitude is very clear that I should not go for surgery at the first. Our aim is not to go for surgery. So in cases of acute cases like gallbladder also, and also in appendicitis, our aim is to manage the case conservatively as much as possible. And in those cases where 80% cases usually recover from conservative management as we face day-to-day life. But if at all there is appendicular abscess, or you are finding that clinically it has to be drained, then as we are going for percutaneous cholecystostomy, our aim should be doing a percutaneous appendicular abscess drainage. And I think our aim is not to go for surgery at the beginning. That is my view.
Okay. MG? You are getting patient for appendicitis. How do you go ahead with it?
1 minute. Sunil, I would do the same thing as we did for gallbladder. If it is an acute emergency, then deal with it. If you can manage conservatively, manage conservatively. If you have no other choice other than going for acute emergency, then exactly same precautions as we have talked about for gallbladder, laparoscopy, and deal with it. Same precautions. Nothing special, consent, everything becomes same. If you can avoid. If you cannot avoid, just go through it.
Okay. Dr. Arupaba? Your voice is not there. Yeah.
Yeah, the same approach, but if there is a big appendolith or there is perforation, if there is extension beyond the appendicular area, there is a small perforation and all, these have a high chance of not responding to conservative treatment, and maybe for them you ultimately will end up with surgery. Rest, initial approach, conservative.
So you get a patient of acute severe appendicitis, sonography showing 12 mm appendix. How would you proceed, Arupaba?
So possibly in these cases, I would go in for a surgery.
Okay. Now we got a question from Dr. Nafis. He has said that there is a patient with ultrasound shows 19 millimeter appendix with loose stools, means diarrhea, and pleural effusion, and total count was 17,000. Obviously, they treated conservatively on the first day, so next day the total count came down to 9,000. So how to proceed in such a case? Ashwin?
So the patient is responding, and I presume he's stable right now. That is why the counts have started to come down. And if the patient is symptomatically improving, I'll just continue with the antibiotics for 5 days. And once he's better, then I will discharge him. It is similar to how we would treat an appendicular abscess. We even have a conservative management approach and do an interval appendectomy. So this is something like that, just buying time till the next, hopefully the next episode will happen later. And then the situation would be a little more stable and we can deal with it.
Okay. I think he is worried that whether the patient was COVID-19 positive and that's why the total count has gone down significantly.
So we know that there is a GI manifestation for COVID and diarrhea is one of those manifestations. So as we are talking, all patients are COVID positive unless proved otherwise. So this is the scenario right now we are in. So this patient definitely has a minor criteria of COVID as well. So I would be more wary and I would definitely check the patient for COVID.
Plus he has pleural effusion.
Okay. Now, in the ideal world, if all of us are having access to COVID-19 test, then obviously we should do the COVID-19 test of each and every patient before doing a surgery. Would you agree?
Right, sir.
But that is not the ideal world we are living in now. We don't have the luxury of doing tests for each and every surgical cases. And so we have to pick and choose, and we have to devise the formula in such a way so that we don't expose ourselves, our patients, and our staff to the higher risk. So I move on to these are the emergency indication, absolute indications for emergency surgery. I would request Dr. Chittaranjan Das to narrate them.
So this is only the for surgery who can be mentioned, and we can go for surgical interference. And those are, number one, the bowel perforation. Number two is ischemia of mesentery or the bowel. Then any type of obstruction which is not responding, and incarcerated hernias. If these four conditions has been given, where you have to interfere and you have to go for surgery. Because in these cases, conservative management has got no role. And I think we have to be very cautious while dealing cases like this.
Okay, MG, you have thoughts on this?
I think basically we need to deal with emergencies as we normally deal with. I don't think there are exceptions to that. I only have one thing here, what you mentioned earlier. See, the number of cases we are doing during these periods are very limited only to emergencies. All these patients should have COVID testing done because you're going to theater, you're exposing them to so many people, anesthetist staff, and I think everybody should be tested since you're going for an emergency surgery in these cases. Elective surgeries, anyway, elective surgeries you're avoiding. So I feel tests have to be done and deal exactly like what we deal with all emergencies.
Okay, we have a comment from Dr. Mohan Kopikar. He suggested that for smoke evacuation, I connected one of the port outlet under water bottle, just like ICD. So do you think, Ashwin, it will work?
So it also depends on how they're going to discard it. And the problem with COVID is it is not only aerosol, it also is a fomite spread. So that means that entire container, even though if you remove the fluid and everything and the asymptomatic precaution, still a virus can be there. There is no filter also used in this scenario. So I would just say it is like reducing the amount of contamination which can possibly happen. I wouldn't say it would be totally foolproof.
It is something better than nothing, but it is not ideal. It is not the ultrafiltration device which will filter the virus out. So that is there. There is one comment from Dr. Kanagwel. For CBD calculi and gallstones with biliary colic, can CBD clearance and stent in place be fine now and operate them in say 6 weeks? consideration is due to the prevailing situation. Dr. Arubaba.
Yeah, but endoscopy is to be avoided as present unless it is an emergency. So if the patient has a, many of these CBD stones are asymptomatic. I don't think there is any urgency to rush into doing an ERCP and stone clearance unless the patient is having cholangitis or obstructive jaundice. If it is simple asymptomatic CBD stone incidentally found, I think nothing should be done at present.
No, he's mentioning probably this is the case with a cholangitis, CBD stones, ERCP done, CBD clearance done, and stent put. After that, what would you do?
Already done. Then wait for wait for some time for doing the cholecystectomy in the present scenario.
You can wait for 6 to 8 weeks once the emergency is over, or if the pandemic situation is over. So I think that's the right comment. Another question again from Dr. Kanagwal. How long a stent be left in place? PCT driven surgical decision or role in this situation of PCT, especially in a case of non-septic condition? Dr. Ashwin?
So I think it's a little contradictory because one, if there is only cholangitis, we said we will do a ERCP. So we presume that the patient had some form of infection. In these patients, I would probably leave it to up to 3 to 4 weeks. It shouldn't be a problem. A lot of the times, these stents generally get displaced on their own. So there is no possibility of it getting obstructed and causing more problem again, because the endoscopists are pretty good in doing a big sphincterotomies, or even surgeons who do ERCP for that matter. So I don't think I would be too concerned about the stent causing any blockage and infection right now.
Okay. By and large, the plastic stents we are using in ERCP can be left over at least for 6 months. And sometimes we get the patient who have forgotten to come back for the removal of the stent. In such scenario, we have taken out after a longer time also. But 6 months is a recommended period, the maximum recommended period. However, as we discussed earlier, the stents can be removed once this emergency period, the pandemic period is over. The lap chole or the open chole is done, and after 2 to 3 weeks after cholecystectomy, the stent can be removed. I don't think there is any role of PCT in making surgical decision, because it is not always a guiding one. If it is collaborating with your clinical findings, then fine. Otherwise, you rely more on your clinical data and the day-to-day improvement in the patient and the LFT and the CBC, etc. Now we have one case presentation from Dr. Ramananda. He said that I did perforated appendix and 2 empyema GB with 12 pneumo. Gas flow at 10, lowest electrocautery without opening the port valve, suctioning smoke with suction cannula, removing pneumo before removal of specimen in bag, holding the bag before suctioning out the pneumo and bringing the specimen back close to the umbilical port. I use only incision enough to place port so that gas doesn't leak. So these are all the precautions we discussed earlier he has taken, and he did some appendicectomy and cholecystectomy. Well, it can be done. We are not saying that it cannot be done, but it is not safe to do. Your thoughts, Venki, on this? Dr. Venkatesh? Okay, Ashwin, your thoughts on this?
So sorry, the screen got cut and only I reconnected back. So could you just repeat the question if it's okay?
There is a surgeon, he says that he did 2 appendix and 2 gallbladders with a pneumo of 12 and flow of 10, lowest electrocautery, and he took precaution to prevent the gas leakage. So what I am saying is, it can be done with taking the precaution, but it is not safe to do. So your thoughts on this?
So totally agree with your thoughts. Anything can be done. It's not the question about whether it can be done or cannot be done. But the problem is what are the risks which the surgeon and the entire surgical team is going to be exposed to. So we already know from our own country anecdotal experiences, like there were 3-4 doctors who have been continuing to see OP and they have infected few patients and some of their team members as well. There has also been interventions done where the patient was totally asymptomatic, did not have any COVID symptoms, but later only they came to know that the patient had COVID, and even one patient did not survive after the procedure. So this was more like a stent placement which was done. So these are the issues which we are facing with right now. And we also know from Italy, they have 1 lakh COVID patients, and of which 15,000 people were medical people. So they were surgeons and various different doctors who are affected by this. So you imagine in a country like theirs, if they have 15% exposure for the medical staff, in a country like ours, how much can be the exposure? So I would strictly say that avoid it if possible. So the indications are very clear. Unless it's a very sick patient where nothing is going to work or the conservative approach has failed, then we would probably think about emergency situation, because no hospital right now is equipped to deal with all these emergencies, especially in laparoscopy. So if I have to do, I will still lean towards open surgery more than laparoscopy.
Yeah, very good. I would sum up that there is no point in being a hero and just to show that I can do it, because you can do it, but you are exposing yourself and others among your OT to a lot of the chances of viral transmission. So it's better to be safe rather than sorry. We have one question from Dr. Ishwamurthy. He is the Honorary Secretary of IAGS. The role of spinal anesthesia as compared to GA in these cases. So I'll go to Dr. M.G. Bhatt. Dr. M.G.
Can you just repeat, please? I didn't hear.
Dr. Ishwamurthy has a question that role of spinal anesthesia as compared to GA in this era.
I think compared to GA, definitely spinal anesthesia would be of less exposure to COVID, because you don't have the tubing, you don't have the anesthesia aspect. So I think in a way, he has got a point that if somebody wants to use spinal anesthesia and if they think it is feasible for it, definitely the exposure is better than the general anesthesia for the anesthetist, and the aerosol spread is reduced. Rest of the things for operation remain same.
Arupabha, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, in fact, the Indian Society of Anesthesiologists has, in their recommendation, they have mentioned this, that regional anesthesia is preferable to general anesthesia. So those cases which can be done under regional anesthesia should be done under regional anesthesia. Of course, in some cases, it might not be possible to do other regional anesthesia, but regional anesthesia is definitely preferable.
Yeah, I believe that general anesthesia during intubation and extubation, anesthetists are exposed to the maximum risk of the viral transmission. And that is one of the reasons that we should avoid general anesthesia as far as possible. Now, this is a intercollegiate general surgery. Hello. Yeah, sorry, I got disconnected. Now I am back with you. So this intercollegiate general surgery guideline, in one slide, they have summarized everything. That for emergency surgery, test all the COVID-19, test all the patient for COVID-19. We also say that, but that is not possible in our country as of now. Second thing is treat all as positive. I agree to that. CT thorax in last 24 hours, also that is not feasible in our country. If we are doing CT abdomen, then add CT thorax. That is what we can do. Plant surgery, risk assessment for COVID-19, greater risk of surgery, take a special consent. and risk reducing strategies as we discussed, or you can add stoma if it is a bowel surgery or something where you are worried about the leak. PPE for all the laparotomies for all the staff members, unless the patient is proven COVID-19 negative, but there is a chance of 10 to 30% false negative results. Include eye protection, practice donning and doffing. Now this one point is very important, practice donning and doffing. I'd like to have opinion from our panelists. Anybody? Ashwin?
So to the steps, or what do you want us to?
How important is to practice donning and doffing?
So the donning and doffing, actually they have a proper protocol similar to how we have a good hand washing technique, how it has to be done and everything. The same way the donning and doffing, if we don't do it in a proper manner, it's as good as not using a PPE and just using a simple mask and trying to carry out these procedures. So I think it is of paramount importance that they understand how a proper donning and also a doffing has to be done.
I think it is very important to practice it by surgeon and by the staff of the operation theaters. Then the theater minimum staffing levels, all staff wears PPE, stop positive pressure ventilation or reduce the pressure, smoke extraction or filtration devices, intubation and extubation should always be done inside the operation theater. Laparoscopy, the Royal College of Surgeons are saying should not be done. Filters, etc. are difficult to implement in practice. Appendicitis, either conserve or do open appendicectomy. Cholecystitis, either conserve or do open cholecystectomy. For endoscopy, only emergencies. Follow the guidance from the Endoscopic Society. And upper GI endoscopy requires full PPE because there are chances of aerosol particle dissemination. So to conclude, we have the take-home message from all the faculties that we should have proper and thorough knowledge and training of the medical staff among our hospitals. No elective surgery or endoscopy. Acute appendicitis, acute cholecystitis, if possible, conserve with IV antibiotics followed by oral antibiotics. Surgery only when absolutely mandatory for the reason discussed earlier. Practice safe surgery. Use percutaneous procedures where possible, available, and safe. Protective gears should be worn by entire OT staff, not only surgeons. Open surgery is preferable over laparoscopy. No laparoscopy in the absence of ultrafiltration devices. Do you agree to this, all of you?
Yes.
Yes. So we now have a very important message from our president, Dr. Raman Goel. And I will play his video message first.
Dear friends, COVID virus has made life very difficult for everyone. It's not a question of how it has affected surgical practice. It's also a question of how people around us are affected by it. Anesthetists, physicians, intensivists, nurses, and even ward boys who are helping treat patients of COVID in different hospitals are at a very high risk. IAGS, in an emergency meeting last Sunday, decided to set up a fund to directly deliver protective instruments, equipment to these people in various government hospitals. To this end, a fund of 10 lakh rupees was set up and the equipment were purchased. We have already delivered in last 2 days protective equipment to a medical college in Kolkata, a medical college in Tamil Nadu, and we have requests from 15 institutions across the country for almost 50,000 protective equipments, which includes the premium institution from Delhi, a hospital which is treating maximum corona patients in Mumbai, and from Jaipur and other places. In a core group meeting, members of this task force have allocated protective equipment for around 6 major hospitals around the country which will be delivered in next 2 to 3 days. Friends, to help these members of our community fight coronavirus, we have put in our bit. It's time that each one of us feel passionately about it, feel from your heart, and contribute to this IAGS fund. 100% of the amount that you contribute will be used to purchase protective equipment. Each set of equipment costs about 800 to 1,000 rupees. But that amount on a particular day might be saving a life of one of our medical professionals. They are required to fight this virus for next 3 months or 6 months. They are required to protect our population. They are required to protect us, God forbid, if any one of us or of our family member ends up with a COVID positive status. So friends, we are giving out details of our IAGS bank accounts here. Please feel free to take a snap of this so that you can transfer money. Don't forget to put your name under that. We may not be able to issue the receipt right now. You can use your screenshot as a receipt, but make sure that you contribute. Most of the EC members have generously contributed. Please also contact your patients to stand up with the medical team now. And if each one of you can contact one corporate person to contribute generously, that will be of great help. Thank you so much. Thank you, and looking forward for your help.
I thank all my panelists, faculties, IAGS, and I thank LabGuru for this wonderful webinar. This is the first in the history of IAGS to have this kind of webinar, and we are going to have regular webinars from now onwards. And I say goodbye to all of you, and we have discussed so many things here, and I hope that this will be helpful to our surgical colleagues. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you, everyone. And thank you all LabGuru viewers for joining us. We have seen that there are so many questions that you all have posted, and we'll soon try and get all the answers from the panelists. We are sorry that due to time restriction, we have to stop this webinar right now, but we will see to it that we are posting all your questions right there on the comment box on LabGuru. Thank you so much for joining once again.